Welcome everyone to today's Flex webinar. I'm your host, Marcus Merritt. Today we're going to be covering advanced workflow. In a previous webinar, we covered basic workflow of what does the workflow do and how does it work. And today we're going to talk about the specific things of deep down inside how it works and how you can then change that workflow for your organization to help your internal organization operate better. Workflow is really great thing. It's actually my favorite thing in Flex because it really can do a lot to help problem solve within your organization. You can use the workflow to control your process or to change your process. You can use the workflow to communicate internally, and not just by the emails that are sent, but even by the statuses themselves help to communicate with others within your organization where a project is in your pipeline, in your process. And so having a good workflow, I think, is very vital to having a good process and a good communication within your organization. So with that, we're going to dive right in. So where we find the workflow is under projects and workflow. Pretty straightforward, okay? Here's all the workflows. The first thing that I want to highlight is that as we've made changes to the workflow, or as other people have had other ideas, there have been additional workflows added in the base system. When these added, the base system changes sometimes which one it is, but we don't get rid of any previous ones because we don't want to change what is the current process for any company. So if you've been on Flex for a long time, you may be on, for example, this pull sheet workflow, but if you've been on for a short time, yours is on the pull sheet linked workflow. Okay, there's not a giant problem with either. We're going to talk today about how to make some changes and how to improve things. But first, it is important to check which workflow you are currently using. For this, you just need to go to the document that what it is. So that's the projects and project elements. And on this, I'm going to pull up for the pull sheet, which I loaded already. And on the first tab of identity and exposure, you can go towards the bottom and you'll see here the workflow that is currently attached to this is the pull sheet linked workflow. This is also how, if you just want to completely override and change your workflow rather than just make some tweaks, you could create a whole new workflow and then change which one it's going to be selected here. Okay, so that's that first thing I want to highlight. The next thing, I'm going to just go ahead and go into the quote workflow, which for a regular Flex customer is kind of the most common workflow that's in use. Okay. And we see here the menu that we get at first, okay? Generally like this, we don't need a description. Sometimes people will put a little bit of a basic of what the process is. I don't generally care for it. The initial state is important, okay? And this thing is important we're going to talk about down here. We see this is the workflow state list, okay? So all of these where we say name is the workflow state. And the workflow state is different than the status. Now, we do notice, though, in this one, that every one of our states are one for one with our status, okay? And that will be true about 90% of the time, okay? But occasionally there are times when we want our state and our status to not match up on purpose, and so there is a good reason for this separation of, okay? State is about where the item exists, and the status that is given to it gives it its attributes, okay? So really quick, I just want to hit on statuses just briefly. We kind of talked about this in the previous one, but in here, for example, confirmed, we have in here the attributes that are given to this. The colors, whether it creates conflict, is closed or locked, those kind of things, probability. Those are directly to the status, but again, the status and the state do not have to be the same, okay? But with that, in here, we've said, I want this to start at the state of inquiry, okay, which has the status of inquiry, okay? If you are choosing to make changes on this, maybe your organization says, we mostly just work with one client and everything what they call us, it's going to happen, and we want to start forward into tentative. We want to start, with our shows at least starting to reserve equipment, okay? I've worked with a few companies that have done this. If that makes sense for your organization, that is fine. If you change that and you change this state, we also need to go to that financial document edit, again, under the projects, project elements, and then here. And in this, we have to go to the status options, and you want to change the default status, okay? Because this does actually control the status that it starts in, okay? The state is where it will start, and anytime we then use the workflow to move the state around, it will override the status. But in that starting state, it will actually take this status rather than the state's status, and so we need to make sure those match up so as to not have problems of communication or have the settings be correct there, okay? That's the first key thing, and I will show some examples in a minute of ones where their status and the states are not the same, but that's the first kind of thing I want to highlight. The next thing I want to mention really quick, and the only thing to me that I feel sometimes is hard for people in understanding these menus, is that because workflow is not necessarily a linear process, it can jump back and forth, it's hard for us to make it in a way where it assumes a linear process. And so you see that these states are all alphabetical, okay? But for a lot of people that gets confusing because you're trying to keep in mind, well, what is the order of these things under the concept of it went in the generally linear process, okay? If for you it would help to have it in a better linear process, what I recommend is that you can go. So right now we say inquiry is where we start. That's our first step. I can double click this state, and this will let me change the name of the state. This is where the status is assigned to it, but the state is here. And so I can say that I want to name this state 01 because this is the beginning of my process, okay? By doing that and coming back to the quote workflow and reloading, it is now moved up to the top, okay? So then if I want to say tentative is next, we can go here and 02 and update. We see that we're not changing anything with the names of these statuses. So on the calendars and on the other pages, it's not going to change anything for anyone else. It's only affecting this for you as the person who's making the edits to this to help you better understand the order of them. You do see that I've done this as 01, not 1, under the concept that maybe I get myself to more than 9 different statuses or different states, and I may need to have it go up to our number, so I like to do that to 2-digit, okay? It's just a thing there. The base system does not have that, but I've done that for a lot of customers, and they find that easier to help them understand their process, okay? I'm going to finish the rest of them. Just want to kind of highlight that as a quick option, okay? Once we have our states there, we have to have actions to move around between the states, okay? Those are our workflow actions. We see those listed over on the right side column of our actions, okay? So what I want to start doing, because that's where really the most control is in the actions, I want to overview what the actions each do, okay? So I'm going to pop, like we're going to do a new workflow action and start talking about it, but then I'm going to jump around as we go through these to kind of help make it easier to understand, okay? So first, when we do this, the name is just the name of, let's do this by popping open an actual action. So you see, I can open the action by just clicking it. So then we see that it has all of its selections there and done, okay? So we see the name. The name is just what the words are going to be in that workflow menu, okay? What people are going to see. So it's about having it be the action to help remind people, what is this going to do, okay? That's why we see things are very commonly like cancel quote, confirm quote, mark as tentative, mark as inquiry, things like that to help people understand what they're doing, okay? The next is the confirm screen, and I actually think that is bad wording on it. It's actually a recap screen, okay? It's a screen that pops up and says, after it's processed, so this is not an extra, you have to say okay or it won't do it. That always happens. It's after it's done, it's going to pop back up and said, hey, this is what I did, okay? So that is the purpose of that. I commonly turn it off. Some people like it on, doesn't really matter. For the next, we see that we have our source state and our target state. This is where we start, what states this action will be available in, or what state this action will be available in, and what state we will end up in after we've run this action, okay? A couple important things is, and I'm going to use a couple examples to show, that first, we do not have to change states when running a workflow action, okay? Something like in confirmed, our create, update, pull sheet, it starts in confirmed, and it ends up in confirmed, okay? It's like in the idea of you taking your dog for a walk around the block. You accomplished something, but you got back to the same point where you started because you didn't want to end up somewhere else. You just needed to accomplish some things in the process, where in this we needed to create a pull sheet and email people to let them know about that. We'll talk about those in more detail in a minute. Okay. The next thing that's important to understand, and this is better to actually look at that confirmed state, is that in here we see that I have 3 different actions to get into this that are called confirm quote, and 3 that are called reset to confirmed. We have to make an extra action for every time we're going from one place to another place. Even if all 3 of these were ending up in confirmed, but each of these are starting in a different place. They can't share workflow actions. They each have to have their own action because of the way the menu works, okay? So this one probably comes from inquiry, this one comes from tentative, this one comes from canceled is my guess, and then these are from forward of need to invoice, invoice created, closed, okay? So we have to have additional actions anytime we go, even if all of them are ending up in the same place, okay? And that's why a lot of times it's good to either look at this menu of your ins and outs, or just look at here on each one and you're trying to go, from this place, if I'm sitting here, what do I want my options to be available? Where do I want to be able to go, okay? One more thing really quick I want to hit while I'm talking on this a little more in detail. When you create new actions, it will alphabetize these actions. If once you're done with all of your actions and you're happy that this is what you think all of them are going to be, you can on this menu reorder these outflow actions. You can say, you know what, I want create update to be first, I want flag to be second, and then I want it to be in level of downgrade, so reset to tentative, inquiry, and then cancel last, and update. And it will save that order change until I create a new action where it will re-alphabetize them, okay? So that's the one thing to do. We can control it, but we have to make sure it's the last thing we do or the system will want to alphabetize them for us, okay? So going back to our action, so we'll go back to looking at maybe this just confirm quote here. So again, we see different source state, different target state, okay? May not have to be, can be. This is another confirm quote. This one starting in tentative, the one I showed before started in inquiry, okay? We're gonna skip change to type, and we're gonna skip these chained actions for a minute. We're gonna come back to those. We are going to go to executor groups next, okay? Executor groups is about putting security permissions on who has the rights to run this workflow action, okay? Now, within the base security, which I won't get into, there is a manage project elements, which will let someone run any workflow action, okay? But if we then say, well, generally this person can run workflow, but I don't want them running this specific workflow, we can put executor groups on. These are only controlled by your security groups. You can't do it by a specific person without creating a new group and making them the only person in that group, okay? You can only do it by security groups. An example of this, just to show, and what I want to do is, I have this example here that I'm going to go forward in my workflow, and I'm going to confirm it. I'm going to not send my email right now. And then I'm going to flag it as ready to invoice under the idea that I'm the sales guy and I send this over to accounting to let them know. Right now, I have the ability to generate the invoice. But if your organization is like I think the majority of organizations that use Flex, they want to have the accounting staff be the one to generate that invoice and send that invoice, we need to put a security permission on that. We need to change the executor groups. So we're going to go back in here and notice that I'm currently in the ready to invoice state and status. And so this is the action of generate invoice. So what I'm going to do, because I do have administrator permissions on this, I am going to go to this and say only accounting can do this. So you'll see here that you select which one, and then after you select it, you hit add. If you want to remove them, hit the X, and then make sure we say update afterwards, okay? Now that I've made that change, I'm going to go back over to my system and reload this. And now if I look at my workflow, we see I don't have the permissions to do that anymore. It now requires someone who has the accounting security group attached to them, and I don't have that, okay? That's all that is. The main common places where people utilize that is in that generating invoices, and then is it within the PO workflows where people want to put approval processes into place. Similarly, I've seen people put things like approval processes into place on bigger organizations or with maybe a junior salesperson, okay? The key there. Going back to looking at our available actions here. The next is inflow and outflow. We're going to jump then up to our chained actions next. We're going to talk about these, okay? So our chained parent and chained child actions are the ability of what we showed in the workflow process, where you can chain things to say an action in this workflow will also run an action in a parent or a child document that is related to this, okay? So in this example, what I'm going to do is first I'm going to show a chained action, which actually I probably already did. So we had before, our project was sitting at inquiry and our event folder above it was sitting at tentative, okay? In our actions, we have on our confirm quote, which I ran from inquiry, we have this chained parent action of say, I want to run the event workflow. If I have an event folder parent, I want to confirm the event when I confirm this quote, okay? And it's important when we do this to think about that process and make sure that is a chained thing we want to do. If I'm making an event folder, it's generally because I have 2 or more quotes in this project. Well, what if you win one of them and you lose the other one, okay? You're doing a general session and a breakout session. You lose the breakouts to the house, but you still get the general session, okay? I'm going to then cancel one of them and I'm going to confirm the other. If I cancel the one, is the event canceled? No, okay? But if I confirm one, do we consider the event confirmed? Yes, in this case, we say yes. Generally, if at least one portion of the event is happening, the event is happening even if we are not doing as much of it as we were hoping to, okay? So that's why we have that there. So it ran in the background, which if I just reload this, we'll see that I never touched or opened the event folder, but it moved forward to confirmed when I confirmed the quote. It didn't do anything when I marked it to ready to invoice because we don't have that plan to chain to happen, okay? So now what I want to do is I want to talk about a chained child action. So I'm going to reset this back to confirmed, okay? And we are going to create the pull sheet for this. So we have a child document. Now, this is an important thing because I do know that some people who have older systems, this is not default in your system, okay? So this is kind of important to keep in mind. So in here, in my, and this is one of the key things to check. So if I look at my pull sheet linked workflow, which is what I have, we need to be sure, do I have a canceled state and a canceled status? And do I have this cancel automation? Okay, you see here in the pull sheet, the way we've built this, where we have a state called none that has no status, that all of the actions are called automations. All of these are designed to never be run manually, but be triggered actions based on something else. Most of them are based on running a finalization of a scan record. When I finish scanning, I finalize the pull sheet. That runs the prepped automation. When I finish the returning, that will then, the manifest will tell it to run the returned automation as a chained parent action. But it's also this cancel, I want to make sure just to show, because we're mostly talking on the quote, that in my confirm, if suddenly the client calls back and says, hey, sorry to say, but this is going to get canceled. We're not do this anymore. we are going to cancel that quote. And we want to make sure that we don't suddenly still have warehouse guys pulling gear for a show that's not happening, okay? So we've set this to be child action of canceling a crew list if we built that, and canceling the pull sheet, okay? So that's built in, okay? When adding these, the only thing that I will just say is you have to be careful of finding the item on the list, because it pulls every workflow action in your entire system. So you have to kind of go through of saying, okay, I'm looking for an on the idea. I'm looking for pull sheet linked workflow, not pull sheet, but pull sheet linked. And then I'm looking for that cancel pull sheet automation. The one other thing I want to mention is you'll see in here on some of these where there are multiple actions. Like we showed earlier, there's multiple actions that seem like they're the same thing, okay? In this case, it doesn't actually matter which one you select unless you've made specific efforts to make them have different settings on them. For example, different inflow or outflow jobs, and we'll get to that in just a minute, okay? The key is the source state part of this is about which menu will you see this? Which state do you have to be in where when I go over to the project, I'll see it on the right side workflow menu. But in this, because I'm triggering it from another action, it happens no matter what. If I trigger that action and the pull sheet is in prepped already, the system doesn't care. It still moves it to canceled, okay? So the thing we have to keep in mind that it's going to run it no matter what. So you need to be sure that no matter what is the proper action on that, okay? That's kind of there. You see that we can only have one chained parent, but we can have multiple chained child because an item can only have one parent, but can have multiple children, okay? So those are the keys on both of those actions, okay? So now I want to get down to talking about the inflow jobs and outflow jobs. And technically all we're really going to talk about is outflow jobs, and this is why. They're not actually any different. The terminology is from an old way that Flex did things, where it actually ran actions when you would either go into or out of a specific state. But over time, we came to realize that sometimes it doesn't matter if I'm coming into or out of this. What matters is where I'm going to and from, and that makes the decision about what I want to do in my inflow or outflow. I may not want to send the quote canceled every time I cancel it, but I do if it's confirmed. So it matters not just where I am ending up, but where I'm starting and where I'm ending up. If I go from inquiry to canceled, a lot of people in the organization maybe don't care, and I don't care to send an email, okay? So it still holds that old terminology to not confuse people who are on the old system, but they basically do the same thing. And my hope is in the future, they will be merged into one thing called workflow jobs, okay? That's what it's going to do, okay? In the workflow jobs of our list of different things we can do, these are stored under projects, workflow jobs, okay? You will notice that the large majority of these are this workflow simple email notification, okay? It's that basic email that you've seen. It's designed to be an internal email generally. It's about communicating of a change of status to other people within your organization, okay? That's kind of the key thing. I want to show that you can get to it from here, but I want to show a quick thing of my common preference of how to make edits on something like that. So let's say that I'm doing that flag is ready to invoice, okay? I'm one of those organizations that, again, we are going to push forward, we're gonna flag is ready to invoice, and we want this to go to accounting. Well, we don't know your accounting email, so it can't be set up in your system beforehand, okay? So to me, the best way to do it is you find the action you're planning to run, you'll see that outflow job there, and I can click it, and that will then open that workflow job into a new menu, okay? So this is the menu for that simple email notification job, okay? We see here what's listed subject, what message text. Again, an important thing, this can only be basic text. There's no HTML, there's no logos. That is part of why it's very commonly, these are only internal emails. We may like it's coming from the user, but it's actually coming from some Flex email. So sometimes you do need to be careful to, whitelist email to make sure things get in. On the to address, it is default set to go to auto, which is the distribution list. Generally, that means it's going to go to the person responsible or the account manager, okay? But if we then also want this to go to our accounting person, we can go in here and just add a comma and accounting at flexrentalsolutions.com, and we will have added that additional person to populate when we run this action, okay? We can also have BCC addresses if the boss wants to get that, we can do that. Or we can change other things here. We notice all the ones that the spell check is happy with, those are all based on the substitution tokens on the right side. Unfortunately, in this menu, the substitution tokens do not have a search field currently. That is something I'm sure will improve. But there are good search tokens, a lot of really helpful things in there for that. Edits to this, so if I was going to change this because it said this was your company, not Flex, you could change in here, default, whatever you want to do that way, okay? I'm gonna go ahead and save this and demo it really quick. So back on my project, that's my workflow. So we see there on the pull sheet, I intentionally have no actual workflow actions because they're all in that automated hidden settings, okay? So here, run that flag is ready to invoice again. And now we see that it's pulling up me for the auto as the account manager, and then accounting because I add in there, okay? Also, recap in the demo that the pull sheet, so if I go ahead and hit cancel on this, then I can go back to my pull sheet and reload it, and we'll see that this status is now changed to canceled as well, okay? So we have kind of that ability to do those chain parent, okay? I don't want to get deep into the workflow jobs. The other thing is there are some of these over here that do not work, do not do anything. Some of them that work fine. Mostly what I recommend is focusing on the simple email notifications or making additional copies of ones that are very similar to these. And if you want more than that, reach out to support, reach out to training, and we can assist you on more than that. There are just some quirks in a few of the others of these that do work that you're going to need extra help, and I don't want to try to take the time to cover in this webinar. And so let me go up here. So we've covered all of the different parts of this except for the change to type. And for the moment, I'm not going to cover that because it, again, is a complicated thing that very few people use. I think it's very handy. And if I feel like we're okay on time, I might get to it later. But right now, what I just want to do is give some examples of some specific common changes that I do for people so you can see more of a full example of making a change to the system, okay? So what I'm going to do, one of the first things that I will commonly do for people is some company will say, we commonly have an event, whether it's for one client that's over and over, or maybe a venue you regularly work in that you send the same gear, the same things, and you want to be able to easily copy that. For that, what we recommend is you make a template for it. You make a blank version of the quote, not one that it was existing, and then you move it into a new state, okay? For this, I want to show how we're going to do the whole process. The first thing we have to do is we have to create a new status for this, okay? We want to create our template status. So I'm going to create a new status option. What I'm going to say is a template. We don't need that. This does not create conflicts. It is not closed, but I do want it to be locked. Locked means people can't edit it, so then someone can't mess it up and get the template to be wrong. And then you, as the administrator, have the ability to unlock it, make changes if necessary, and then move it back into the template status to lock it again, okay? Locks availability is not something we want. That is relative to pull sheets and manifests. And then just really quick for this, I'm just going to give a background color of white so that it will display, okay? So we have to create that new status. Once we've done that, we go back to our quote workflow, and we have to add our new state. Okay, I'm going to reload this really quick to make sure. So we're going to add our new workflow state. Okay, this is going to be our template state, and we will give it our template status. So we have that there. If we wanted to number it, maybe we go, well, this isn't really part of the regular process anyway, so maybe I make it like 99. I want it to be at the bottom. Maybe I want it to be at the beginning, so I change that either way. So for the moment, I'm going to do it like that. Okay? Again, code and description are not required. I tend to not put them in. Okay? Now that that's there, we can go back to our quote and reload it. And we'll see that my new status and my new state are in here, but we don't have any actions out of it. And also, if I go to that other menu, we don't have any actions to go into it. So it actually is floating by itself and not really part of any of the process until we create some new actions, okay? For this, generally what I tell people is you're going to make a new action and you're going to say, because you don't want to do these from existing projects because they're going to have weird details or tweaks that you don't want to kind of carry over in your copies, I'm going to make a new one called create template. I'm going to say that this starts an inquiry because I'm going to have made a blank brand new quote, made it where I want it to be, and then I'm going to move it into the template, okay? I don't need to inform anybody or tell anything. I don't need to chain any actions, but I want to put limitations on who can do this. So I'm going to say that only administrators can run this action, okay? So now if I go back to my quote workflow and I reload, I still don't have anything here, but I now have the ability to go into it. And we again see this automatically alphabetized those actions. So now I need to be able to get out of it in case that, oh, you know what, we've realized we made some changes, we bought some new equipment, we want to have a different base thing that's part of the package, and so we need to change it. So I need to then create a new workflow action. I'm going to call this unlock template. We're going to say no. And then we're going to say we start at the template, but we want to go back to inquiry. And again, so that people can't mess around with them, I'm going to make this so only administrators can do this. Okay, so now if I go back here and reload, we now have the ability to get out of this. Okay, so as the example, just really quick, let's go back here. We are going to reset this to inquiry. We'll see by doing that, we have our ability to create a template. If we say to create template, we've now moved it into the template status. And I have that lock option, but you see here it is locked. It is not closed. The key thing on that is also if I go to projects and quotes, within my statuses, my template is here. So it's still easy to find. I can make it so people learn, oh, you just go and say, I want to only, oh, this is an important thing, and even I commonly forget it. By creating this new template here, this new status, it can have this status, the backend controls it, but the system in other places, like for example, the calendar and those search menus don't know that it's available until I go to the edit financial document quote, which unfortunately is not good at reloading. And I have to tell it that this is a new status that is available for this project, okay? Or I can't, you see it wasn't available. Even though it's showing up on that list, it's not available on my filter because I haven't told the system that it's an applicable status for that project element. It's one of those little settings that even I'll commonly sometimes forget when setting this up. So we have to go to this menu and say, yes, our new status of template is an applicable status. And we hit update. So now if we go back here and we reload, now we'll see that we can train our staff to go here and say only template. Now our template's available. We can quickly go, oh yeah, that's the one I want. I can pop it open. I can take a quick peek at it. and see if it has the items that I'm expecting. And we'll see here, and this is a great improvement in Flex 5, is I can better go in here and I can manipulate and look and dig in and go, what is it that it has? But I don't have the ability to click in and make any edits. It is locked, okay? Once I go, yes, this is the one I want, I can come over to my modify menu and I can copy it and update the name and dates to match my new project that matches that default setting, so I don't have to take a bunch of time listing equipment. Okay, so that is one of the most common ones that I will make changes for customers. So that's the first list. The one other I'm going to use in this quick example that I just want to show in how simple something can be is, let's say you're one of those few smaller organizations that you don't do that. I'm going to send the invoice or the quote as ready to invoice over to the accounting department and wait for them to do it. You're like, I'm the kind of the one-man stop. I do all of it. I don't want to waste that time, okay? So rather than run that flag is ready to invoice and then in ready to invoice, run generate invoice, you just want to generate the invoice, okay? You can do that quite simply by just taking this generate invoice action and changing it to say, I want this to happen at confirmed. By doing just that. Now I've still at the moment listed it to only accounting. I'm going to add administrators on so I have the permissions to do it. But I've now made it so that if I take my project here, and again, I'm going to have to unlock it and then confirm it. It's not send me an email. But now this time, we see right now I have the ability to just generate the invoice on its own. Okay, so I can do that on its own. I haven't for the moment got rid of the flag is ready to invoice because maybe I left those permissions to say that I, as the boss, want to just be able to do it because I do that a lot. But I am prepared that I'm probably going to hire some new junior sales staff and they need to be flagging is ready to invoice. And then those come to me and I generate the invoice. Now, if that happens though, this is important to note that I got rid of that other action. So if they move it to ready to invoice, there's no action there anymore. So at that case, we now need to make a duplicate action. I did the quick simple of just moving the action because you're never going to do the flag is ready to invoice. Honestly, if I was doing that, I would take the flag is ready to invoice and I would hide it under like ready to invoice. So I don't have any way to get in there. I don't get out, but it doesn't matter. But if I was going to leave this for some junior person, I would instead go back and make a new workflow action that I would copy those similar settings on that generate invoice, but one would go from confirmed and one would go from ready to invoice, and then just make sure I'm picking those correct outflow jobs of invoice generator. That's actually the only one that needs to be. Okay, so that's the core of kind of what I wanted to cover today. I know it's a lot of information, and so thanks again for everybody who attended. As always, if you have any additional questions, feel free to go to training@flexrentalsolutions.com, or also if you have specific ideas for topics that you would like me to cover in future webinars, please also email those to training@flexrentalsolutions.com. Okay, thanks everyone so much.